It was supposed to be a good night. Hell, it was a great night. I just closed a deal that I had worked my ass off for, months of late nights, endless meetings, and just grinding to get this right. You know, the type of deal that makes you feel like you're on top of the world for just a moment. So, I was buzzing. I thought, I'll get home, tell Camille about the deal, maybe pop open a bottle of wine. We'll celebrate, have a quiet night. Maybe even start planning our next big adventure. Simple. Peaceful. The way I imagined it. I pulled into the driveway around 11:30 p.m., expecting the usual Camille in her pajamas, maybe the sound of the TV in the background. But no. As soon as I turned the corner into our street, my eyes locked on a gold Mercedes parked in the driveway. A new gold Mercedes. It wasn't hers. I'd never seen it before, and I sure as hell didn't remember her getting a new car. The familiar anxiety that sat in the back of my mind every time I came home after a long day instantly hit. The hair on my neck stood up, but I brushed it off. Maybe one of her friends got a new car, and they came over to show it off. Sure. That's probably it. But something didn't sit right. I stepped out of the car, slammed the door a bit harder than I meant to, and walked toward the front door, my shoes tapping against the pavement. The gold Mercedes seemed out of place in our quiet suburban neighborhood. I unlocked the door and walked inside. "Babe." I called out, but my voice sounded hollow in the empty entryway. No response. The silence felt heavier than usual. I didn't even have time to process what was happening before I heard the sounds from upstairs. Soft, muffled voices, followed by what sounded like Camille's laughter. That laugh. I'd always loved it, so warm, so carefree. But tonight, it made my skin crawl. I stepped closer to the staircase, my heart pounding harder with every step I took. I'm not sure why I didn't run straight up there and demand answers. Maybe I was still in shock. But there was something about that moment, that exact moment where I knew. Deep down, I knew that everything was about to change. And I wasn't ready for it. I pushed open the bedroom door. And there she was. Camille, my wife, in bed with another man. I froze. My stomach dropped. Time stopped. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to react. Camille's eyes widened when she saw me. I could barely make sense of the scene in front of me. Her hair was tangled, her lips swollen, like she had just been kissed by the kind of man I couldn't even begin to understand. The stranger looked at me, startled, his shirt half off, like he was caught doing something no one should ever get caught doing. Camille's face shifted into this defensive, annoyed look, like she was mad that I was even interrupting her moment. "Max, what the hell are you doing here?" she asked, like it was the most normal thing in the world to find your husband walking in on you like that. I wanted to scream. To ask every damn question at once. To punch something. To leave. I didn't know what to do, what to say. But what stuck in my chest like a knife was this cold realization: this wasn't just about cheating. This was betrayal in the place that was supposed to be safe, our home. Our sanctuary. Where I thought nothing could touch us. And that's when the flood of emotions hit. Anger, hurt, confusion, all at once, twisting my insides. But I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the mess that Camille had made of us. Of me. "Max, it's not what it looks like," she stammered, sitting up in the bed, trying to pull the covers around her. It was as if she thought I was still going to believe her lies. And that's when it hit me. She was going to lie. She was going to act like nothing was happening here. That this was all just some mistake, a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. It wasn't at all. This was real. I couldn't move. Couldn't say anything. I just stood there, watching as the man beside her slowly, awkwardly grabbed his clothes. It was like I was watching a scene from someone else's life, something I couldn't believe I was part of. Don't know how long I stood there, my feet glued to the floor, staring at them, at Camille, at this stranger in my bed. Every second felt like a damn eternity. The room seemed to close in around me. I could barely breathe. The guy got dressed quickly, but it wasn't fast enough for me. He fumbled with his shirt, eyes darting between me and Camille. He looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. I didn't even look at him anymore. My focus was entirely on Camille, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I trusted. The woman who had just shattered every ounce of that trust in a heartbeat. I didn't say anything at first. What could I even say? I was seeing red, but my mind was blank at the same time. The silence stretched on until it felt suffocating. Finally, she spoke again. Max, please, you don't understand. It's not, she started, but I didn't let her finish. I stepped forward, my voice shaking, but low, controlled. Don't even try to tell me it's not what it looks like. I saw it. My heart was racing, my hands were trembling, but I wasn't about to show her how broken I was just yet. She looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe? Or was it annoyance? Hard to tell. She slid out of bed and pulled her robe tighter around her, like she was trying to cover something that couldn't be covered. Max, you don't get it. You don't know what it's like. Things have been complicated. We were having problems. I cut her off, stepping closer. You've been sleeping with someone else and you're talking about problems? The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but I couldn't stop them from spilling out. How long has this been going on, Camille? How long? She hesitated, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, like she was deciding whether to tell me the truth or continue with her lies. I could feel the anger in me rising, threatening to boil over. But I needed answers. I had to have them. I don't know what you want me to say, she said, avoiding my eyes. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to protect herself from me, but it was too late for that. I was lonely. Things between us, they just weren't working anymore. And then he was there, and he understood me. He made me feel seen. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I stayed calm, maybe too calm, considering how badly my insides were ripping apart. So you're telling me you've been lonely? After everything we've built together? You didn't think to talk to me first? You didn't think to work through it? She looked down, guilt finally starting to creep into her expression. I didn't know how to tell you, Max. You were always so focused on work. I didn't want to burden you with my feelings. I couldn't wait anymore. Her words were starting to hit me like daggers. They didn't even sound like excuses anymore. They sounded like reasons. Reasons she gave herself to justify this mess she had made of our life. Of my life. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my composure, but I could feel the heat in my chest rising. So what now? What are you expecting, Camille? Am I supposed to just forgive you and pretend like nothing happened? Pretend that this guy is just some mistake? I didn't even know who I was anymore. Who was this person standing in front of her, trying to hold it all together? She looked at me, and for a split second, I thought she might finally admit the gravity of what she'd done. But then her expression shifted again, a little defensive, a little bitchy even. Max, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You never understood me. You always worked, you never listened, and now you want to blame me for everything? This is your fault too. I felt my stomach lurch. My fault. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Are you seriously going to blame me for this? For you fucking another guy in our bed? No. You don't get to twist this around on me, Camille. The guy in the corner, who had been standing there quietly for what felt like an eternity, finally spoke up. Look, man. I didn't want this. I'm sorry, all right? I never meant to. I turned to him, cutting him off instantly. I'm not talking to you. Stay out of this. He didn't argue. He just grabbed his jacket, muttered something that might have been an apology, and made a quick exit. As soon as the door shut behind him, I turned back to Camille. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. The anger was giving way to something deeper, something I couldn't name yet, but it was overwhelming. What do you want from me, Camille? I asked, the words barely escaping through the lump in my throat. What do you want me to do with this? How the hell do I just keep going? She stepped forward, reaching out to me like she was going to try and comfort me, but I stepped back. I couldn't touch her right now. I didn't even want to. I don't want this to end, she whispered, her voice shaky now too. I love you, Mac. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Because if she loved me, none of this would have happened. If she loved me, she wouldn't have let someone else into our life like that. I don't know what love is anymore, I said, almost to myself, but loud enough for her to hear. The words hung in the air. And just like that, I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. I didn't know who we were. I stared at Camille, my chest tight, my mind racing, and I didn't know what to say anymore. Everything felt wrong. The weight of it all was crushing me. All the years we'd spent together, the memories I thought we shared, the quiet little moments I thought were ours, it all felt like a lie. A damn facade. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. She looked like she might cry, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. I shook my head, trying to make sense of what was happening. I don't know what you expect from me, Camille. You've destroyed everything. Everything. The words sounded too harsh, even for me, but they were the truth. My truth. And now you're telling me you love me? I let out a bitter laugh, the pain seeping through. What kind of love is this? She stepped closer again, but I wasn't ready for it. Please, Max, I need you to understand. This wasn't about you. It wasn't even about him. It was about me feeling. Feeling what, Camille? Neglected? Alone. I interrupted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. You didn't come to me. You didn't talk to me. You just threw everything we had away for some guy. She flinched, like I'd slapped her, and for a second, I almost regretted it. Almost. I didn't know how to talk to you, she whispered. I didn't know how to tell you that things weren't right between us. You were always gone. Always working. I felt like I was invisible. You were so focused on everything else, I needed someone to see me. Her words hit me like cold water. It wasn't that I hadn't been there for her. I had. I was always there when she needed me, right? But somewhere along the way, things slipped. I could feel it. I had seen the signs, the distant looks, the way she would pull away when I tried to kiss her, the way our conversations felt shallow. But I had convinced myself everything was fine. I thought we were just going through a rough patch, a phase. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept it. You should have come to me, I said quietly, my voice heavy with regret. You should have told me what was going on instead of throwing it all away with him. Camille looked down, her face flushing with shame. I thought I could handle it on my own. I was wrong. I didn't know how to respond to that. I wanted to scream. To tell her how badly she had hurt me. But a part of me deep down was still holding on to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this could be fixed. I couldn't even explain it. I couldn't let go of her. Not yet. She took a deep breath and looked me in the eyes, pleading now. Max, please, I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. Please don't walk away from me. I looked at her, trying to read her face, trying to figure out if she was being honest or just trying to get out of this unscathed. The truth was, I was broken. I couldn't think straight. All I could do was feel the sting of betrayal, the sharp raw pain that had lodged itself in my chest. I had so many questions. So many things I needed to understand. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice low, desperate for answers. How long have you been seeing him? She hesitated, and the guilt flashed in her eyes, but she didn't speak for a moment. A few months, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. A few months. The words hit me like a punch. I could feel my fists clenching, my teeth grinding. I had spent all that time thinking everything was fine. Meanwhile, she had been sneaking around behind my back. Lying. Hiding. I took a step back, my head spinning. A few months? Are you kidding me? I laughed, but it wasn't a laugh at all. It was bitter, full of anger and hurt. A few months, and you think this is something we can fix? You think I can just forgive this? I didn't mean for it to happen this way, she said quickly. I never wanted to hurt you, Max. I just got lost in everything. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even look at her anymore. I turned away, walking toward the living room, trying to clear my head, trying to breathe. But my heart was still pounding in my chest, my mind racing with a million thoughts. I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. I needed answers. I needed closure. I needed to understand how deep this thing really went. I turned back to her. I'm not staying here tonight. The words felt strange, like they didn't belong to me, but they were true. I'm not staying here while you keep doing this to me. She reached out for me again, but I stepped back. I couldn't let her touch me right now. Not after everything. Max, please, she whispered, her eyes pleading. Where are you going to go? I'll figure it out. I didn't want to tell her anything more. I didn't want to explain myself, didn't want to explain how shattered I felt, how lost I was. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. I'll be back later, I said, not looking back. And then I walked out into the night, not knowing what the hell I was going to do, but knowing that I couldn't just sit there and let her keep making excuses. I had to find a way to take control, even if it meant doing the hardest thing I've ever had to do. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cold air hit me like a slap as soon as I stepped outside. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets, trying to block out the freezing wind, but it didn't help. Nothing was going to help right now. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even care. All I could think about was the sick feeling in my stomach and the images of her with him, her with someone else. I walked down the street aimlessly, trying to clear my head, but it wasn't working. It didn't matter how far I walked or how fast I moved. The truth kept catching up to me, like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I'd always prided myself on being in control of my work, my life, my relationships. But now, I had nothing. Everything I had thought was solid had just crumbled under me. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just Camille's betrayal. It was everything that came with it, the lies, the deception, the broken promises. I didn't even know how I ended up at the bar, but there I was, sitting in a corner booth, nursing a whiskey that I barely even tasted. The place was quiet, a couple of regulars hunched over their drinks, lost in their own worlds. I wasn't here to drink, I was here to think. To figure out what I was going to do next. I pulled out my phone and stared at it. For a minute, I considered calling her. I thought about going back, forcing Camille to face what she had done. But I knew it wouldn't help. There were no more words that could make this right. Not tonight, not ever. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting around, feeling sorry for myself. My mind kept racing. I needed a way to take control back. Camille was still in our house, pretending everything could just go back to normal. She was still lying to herself, lying to me. I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't let it go, not until I understood everything. How deep it went, how long it had been happening, why she felt like she had to do this to me. I'd already figured it out, in some twisted way. I couldn't trust her anymore, but the one thing I could trust was evidence. Proof. I made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her again until I had something concrete. Something that would show me the whole truth. If she wanted to lie to me, if she wanted to pretend that this was just some accident, then fine. I'd make sure she couldn't run from it. I downed the rest of the whiskey and stood up. My hands were still shaking, but I ignored it. I needed to focus. I walked out of the bar, pulling out my phone again, this time scrolling through my contacts. I found the number I was looking for and dialed. "Hey, it's Max," I said when the phone picked up. "I need something. It's important." The guy on the other end paused, and then I heard a low laugh. "Sure, man. What's up?" "I need to get my hands on some photos," I said, my voice low and steady. "Some pictures. Of Camille. And whoever she's been seeing." There was a moment of silence. I could feel the tension rise as I waited for the response. "Photos?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Are you sure about this?" I didn't hesitate. "I need proof, man. I need to know everything. No more games. No more lies." I didn't care if it seemed crazy. I didn't care if people would judge me for it. Camille had crossed a line, and now I was going to do whatever it took to figure out how far that line went. "All right," he said finally. "I'll make some calls. You'll have what you need soon. I'll keep it quiet, don't worry." I hung up without saying anything else. I didn't need to explain myself. I wasn't in a place to explain myself to anyone right now. I walked back to the car, my steps purposeful now. I wasn't going home. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face Camille again, not without knowing what was really going on. Not without the kind of answers that wouldn't leave room for any more lies. And as I drove off into the night, the adrenaline finally hit. I had a plan. I had something I could control. I didn't know what I was going to do with all this information when I got it, but at least I would have something. At least I would know. I wasn't just going to sit back and be the victim in this anymore. No, Camille had made sure of that. But now, it was time to turn the tables. I didn't get any sleep that night. I drove around, aimlessly, trying to distract myself. But I knew deep down I wasn't just avoiding my feelings. I was buying time. Time to figure out exactly how I was going to approach this mess Camille had created. How I was going to get my life back, piece by piece, or at least get some answers. I checked my phone every few minutes, even though I knew my friend was probably still working on getting me those photos. It wasn't that I trusted him, I didn't really trust anyone right now. But I needed something, anything that could give me clarity. Something to make sense of all this chaos. By the time the sun started creeping up, casting a faint glow over the city, I found myself parked in front of my office building. I had no intention of going in. Work didn't matter today. But something about the stillness of it, the emptiness, made me feel like I had control over at least one thing in my life. The rest of it, Camille, the betrayal, the mess that was now my life, that was a different story. I leaned back in the car seat and closed my eyes, trying to settle my mind, but I couldn't escape the images that kept replaying in my head. Camille's face, her frantic attempts to defend herself, the guy in my bed. It was all too much to process in one go. I needed a way to make it tangible, something I could see with my own eyes, something I could hold onto when the weight of it all felt too heavy to bear. Then, around 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. I picked it up, not expecting much, just a text from the guy I had called earlier. The message read, "Got the pics. It's all there. Check your email." I didn't even hesitate. I opened my inbox, my heart pounding in my chest. There were a few attachments. I opened the first photo, and there it was. Camille, caught in a bar. She was sitting at a table with the guy from last night. The guy who had been in our bed. They were laughing, looking comfortable with each other. Too comfortable. My blood boiled as I scrolled through more photos, each one worse than the last. Her laughing at something he said, his hand brushing hers, and then one shot that sent a cold chill down my spine. They were leaving together, walking out of the bar, him with his arm casually around her waist. It wasn't just an affair. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was something real. Something they had been hiding for months. I looked at those pictures for a long time, unable to tear my eyes away. I didn't even know what I was feeling anymore. Anger? Yes. Betrayal? More than I ever thought I could feel. But somewhere deep down, there was this sick sense of clarity. This was what I needed. This was the truth, raw and unfiltered. And now, there was no going back. I put my phone down and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I couldn't just keep staring at these pictures, trying to convince myself that it would be okay. There was nothing okay about this. Nothing. Camille had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. But first, I needed to confront her. I couldn't let her lie anymore. I couldn't let her pretend like I didn't know the full story. I stood up from the car, my hands shaking but my mind clearer than it had been all night. It was time. Time to face her. Time to face the truth, whatever that might be. I drove back to the house, my thoughts a blur. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car parked in the garage. She was home, probably still asleep, thinking everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Everything had changed, and now it was time to make sure she understood that. I stood in front of the door for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle. The adrenaline hit me in waves, and I realized something. I didn't need to shout to yell. Camille had already done enough of that with her actions. I wasn't going to let her play the victim. I was done with that. I had the evidence now. I had the upper hand. I stepped inside, and there she was, still in bed, the covers pulled up around her like she hadn't a care in the world. She looked peaceful. Innocent, even. But I wasn't fooled. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, my eyes locked on her. Her face shifted, and she opened her eyes slowly, taking in the sight of me standing in the doorway. The silence between us felt thick, suffocating. "Max," she said softly, clearly confused, as if she hadn't expected me to come back so soon. "What's going on? Why are you?" I didn't let her finish. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up in front of her face. The photos were there, all of them. Camille's face drained of color as she saw what I was showing her. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. "I have all the answers now," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "You can't lie your way out of this anymore, Camille. I have proof. Everything you've been doing, everything you've been hiding. It's all right here." She opened her mouth again, but this time there were no words. She looked down, clearly caught. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe a plea, maybe more excuses. But she didn't say a word. "I want to know the truth," I said, my voice low but firm. "How long? How far did this go? Everything. No more games, Camille. No more pretending. Her face crumbled, the reality of it all sinking in. And for the first time in this whole nightmare, I didn't feel the crushing weight of my emotions. I felt something else. I felt like I was finally taking control. Max, I'm so sorry, she stammered, but there was no more sincerity in her voice. Just guilt. And that was it. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, standing there, waiting for her to give me the truth. The full truth. And for once, I didn't care how she felt about it anymore. This was about me now. About what I had to do to heal. Camille didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat there, staring at the photos on my phone like she was seeing herself for the first time. The silence felt unbearable, but I wasn't going to break it. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered, her voice cracking. It started as something small. And then it just... I don't know. I didn't know how to stop. I clenched my fists. How long, Camille? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. How long have you been seeing him? Almost 6 months, she admitted, her eyes dropping to the floor. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just about the sex. I felt alive when I was with him. And I hated myself for it. I shook my head, the pain hitting all over again. You could have talked to me. You could have come to me. She looked up at me then, tears filling her eyes. I didn't know how. I thought I could fix it, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to say to that. The words felt like they'd run dry. 6 months. All that time, and I had no idea. I turned away, my heart heavy. I can't do this anymore, Camille. She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. No. You've already done enough. I need time. To think. To figure out what the hell I'm even supposed to do now. With that, I walked out. The door slammed behind me, but it didn't feel like an ending. It just felt like the beginning of everything falling apart. The drive was a blur. My mind kept replaying the conversation, Camille's broken voice, her pathetic excuses. 6 months. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I kept thinking about all the moments we'd shared, the times I trusted her completely, all of it now tainted. I couldn't even look at our home anymore. I parked the car a few blocks from the house, trying to keep the anger from consuming me. But it was there, bubbling beneath the surface. I was furious, heartbroken, and lost all at once. I thought about what came next. I didn't want to go back to Camille just to argue, just to let her tell me more lies. I couldn't keep doing this. I needed space. Time to figure out how to move forward. But the idea of her moving on, of her with someone else, that killed me. I checked my phone. No messages. No calls. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe for her to beg me to come back. Maybe for some part of me to feel relief that it was over. But neither of those things came. I sat there in the silence, the weight of everything pressing on me. I had no idea what was going to happen next, what I should do next. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep pretending this was a marriage anymore. I wasn't sure I could even look at her the same way. I wasn't sure I could forgive her. And that scared me. I spent the next few days in a haze. I moved through the motions, work, eat, sleep, but nothing felt real anymore. Everything that had once felt stable, solid, had shattered. The house that had been home for years now felt foreign, like a place I no longer recognized. The silence between Camille and me stretched longer each day. I wasn't sure if she was waiting for me to come back or if she thought I would just forgive her and we'd go back to normal. But there was no normal left for us. I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, stuck between anger, hurt, and confusion. I didn't owe Camille anything anymore, not after everything she'd done. But I also couldn't keep ignoring how I felt. I needed closure. I needed to know what the hell I was going to do next. So, I called a lawyer. Not because I was sure about divorce, but because I needed to understand my options. I needed to know if I had a chance at starting over, or if I was stuck in this mess forever. The lawyer was kind, patient, and surprisingly understanding when I explained what had happened. He didn't offer me any immediate answers, but he gave me one piece of advice that stuck with me. Take your time. Make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. Not just out of anger. I didn't know what the right reasons were anymore, but I knew I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't let her keep hurting me like this. I had to do something. That night, I finally went back to the house. Camille was sitting in the living room, her face pale, eyes red from crying. But there was something else there too, resentment. Like she was waiting for me to make the first move. "Max," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, watching her. It wasn't enough. None of it was enough. I don't think I can forgive you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I don't know if I ever will." Her face fell, and for a second, I felt a twinge of guilt. But it passed quickly. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for me. I needed to be able to breathe again, to feel like I could live my life without this weighing me down. "I'm moving out," I said. The words were final, no hesitation. "I need space. I need to figure out what comes next." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. The damage was done. I left that night. I didn't have a plan, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't keep living in the same house, sharing the same space with someone who had broken me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to take back control of my life. The first few days after I moved out were a blur. I stayed with a friend for a while, someone I could trust, someone who didn't ask a lot of questions. I appreciated the silence in their apartment, the absence of any pressure to talk about what had happened. But inside, my mind was still racing, still processing everything. I didn't have any answers. I was still lost, unsure if I'd made the right choice. I kept thinking about Camille. I couldn't completely shut her out of my mind. I couldn't forget the years we'd spent together, the love we'd shared, or the moments that were now tainted by the betrayal. I hated myself for still caring, for still wondering if there was a way to fix things. But I knew that I couldn't go back. Not yet, not without some serious time to figure out who I was again, without the constant reminder of what she'd done. The anger was still there, raw and unrelenting, but it was starting to mix with something else, grief. I was grieving the loss of the life I thought I had. I was grieving the person I had been before this all blew up in my face. One evening, I sat down and wrote it all down. Everything. My thoughts, my anger, my confusion. I didn't know why, but it felt good to get it out of my head and onto paper. Maybe it was my way of taking control over the chaos in my life, or maybe it was just a way to clear the fog that had been clouding my mind. I didn't get any answers from the words on the page. But I felt a little lighter, a little less trapped in my own head. The next step, I decided, was to start rebuilding. Not the marriage. Hell, I wasn't even sure I could think about that right now. But myself. I needed to remember who I was outside of all this pain. I needed to get back to what made me feel whole again. So, I made a plan. Small things at first, going to the gym, getting back into hobbies I had let slip, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in a while. I had no idea if it would work. I didn't know how long it would take to feel like I had control over my own life again. But I knew I had to start somewhere. The first step was simply moving forward. And for the first time in days, I felt a tiny spark of hope. The first few weeks after moving out were a strange mix of freedom and loneliness. It was hard to explain to anyone who hadn't gone through something like this, how you could feel so free and yet so empty at the same time. The quiet was both a relief and a reminder that things had fallen apart. I spent a lot of time trying to get my life back in order, to put some distance between myself and the constant reminder of what Camille had done. I went to the gym regularly, though at first, it felt more like a distraction than anything else. I wasn't really in the mood for working out. I was just trying to fill the space in my mind with something, anything, that wasn't her or the images of her with him. But after a few weeks, I started to feel the benefits. My body was in better shape than it had been in a while, and I could feel the stress melting away in small doses. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me a little peace of mind. I also started reconnecting with friends, ones I'd let slip through the cracks during the last few years. People who I had forgotten about when I'd been too wrapped up in my marriage, too focused on work, too blind to see that I was losing myself. They were good to me, understanding, supportive, but also giving me the space to just be myself. It felt good to have people around who didn't see me as the guy whose wife had cheated on him. They saw me as, well, just me. But despite the progress, there were still days when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd be walking around, doing something normal, and then out of nowhere, the reality of it all would come rushing back. The quiet nights alone. The empty side of the bed. The fact that Camille wasn't there anymore. Not in the way I thought she would be. And then, there were the harder days. The ones when I picked up the phone to call her, the ones when I wondered if she was doing okay. If she was feeling as guilty as I was angry. If she regretted it. But I'd stop myself before I could dial her number. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I wasn't even sure I'd ever be ready. I had moments of weakness, moments when I missed the idea of us more than I missed her. I hated that I still cared about her, even after everything she'd done. But that was the part of me that still wanted to believe in love, still wanted to believe that people could change, that she could change. But then I'd remember the photos, the lies, the coldness of that night when I walked away. I couldn't ignore that anymore. And I knew deep down, I had to stop holding on to the version of Camille I had in my head, the one who loved me, the one who was always there for me. That person didn't exist anymore. The hardest part was realizing that I didn't just have to move on from her. I had to move on from the life I thought I'd built, from the future I had imagined for us. And that was the part that still stung. But, as the days went by, I started to feel a little less lost. A little more like myself. It was a slow process, but I was moving in the right direction. And that was all I could ask for right now. One step at a time. Time passed, and with it, the sharp edges of the pain began to dull. It wasn't gone, hell, it was still there in the background, lurking, but it wasn't as all-consuming as it had been in the beginning. I'd started to find small pieces of myself again, doing things I used to enjoy, spending time with people who cared about me. But even on the good days, there were still those moments when everything felt too quiet, too empty. One night, about a month after I left, I found myself sitting on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. The silence wasn't so overwhelming anymore. It was just still. I thought about calling Camille, about asking if we could talk, figure things out. But I stopped myself. The truth was, I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to open those doors again. Not yet. But I realized something that night. I wasn't completely broken. I wasn't the same guy I was when all of this started, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. I was learning to stand on my own, learning to rebuild. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I was starting to live again. It wasn't perfect, but I was moving forward. And that was enough for now. A few weeks later, I found myself in a situation I hadn't planned for. I ran into Camille. I had been avoiding any contact with her, trying to stick to the plan I had made, focus on myself, rebuild my life. But there she was, standing in front of me outside a cafe, looking like she had something to say. For a second, I froze. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, pretend I hadn't seen her. But another part of me, maybe the part that still wasn't entirely sure of what I wanted, made me stop. "Max," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "Can we talk?" I looked at her, my heart still a little raw, but I didn't back away. "I don't know what there is to talk about, Camille." She looked down, almost like she was bracing herself. I need to apologize. For everything. I've been selfish, and I didn't see how much I hurt you. I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to say something harsh, something that would make her feel the same way I had. But I stopped myself. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued. "And I know I can't take back what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, Max. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." I felt a weight settle on me. It wasn't the apology I had been waiting for, but it was the one I needed to hear. It didn't fix anything, but it was a step forward, at least on her part. "I don't know where we go from here," I said finally, my voice low. "I don't know if there's anything left to fix." There was a long silence between us, but for the first time in a while, it wasn't tense. It was just quiet. "Yeah," she said, a small nod. "I don't know either. But I needed to say it. I just wanted you to know that." And with that, she turned to leave, and I watched her go. I didn't feel anger, or hurt, or any of the things I expected. I just felt empty. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. At least now, there was no more questioning. No more wondering what could have been. I was learning to accept what had happened, to accept that things didn't always work out the way we hoped. Maybe that was the only thing I could really control anymore. And that was enough for now. After the brief encounter with Camille, something inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. I realized I didn't need any more apologies or answers from her. She had said what she needed to say, and I had heard it. The rest was on me. I spent the next few weeks focusing even more on myself. I took a weekend trip alone, spent time with old friends, and even signed up for a class I'd always wanted to try. It wasn't about moving on perfectly, but about finding moments where I felt at peace again. When I came back, I knew what I had to do. I had to let go. Let go of the past. Let go of the version of my life I thought I'd have. I didn't need closure from Camille. I didn't need anything from her anymore. I was ready to move forward, no longer as the man who'd been betrayed, but as just me. And for the first time in a long while, that felt good. The weeks that followed felt different. I stopped thinking about what Camille was doing or where she was. I stopped replaying old memories, stopped asking what-if questions. It wasn't easy, but I realized that letting go of the past wasn't about forgetting, it was about making space for something new. I began to notice the small things again. The way the sunlight hit the street in the morning, the feel of a good conversation with a friend, the satisfaction of completing a project I was proud of. I was rebuilding, slowly but surely, and with each small step, I started to feel more like myself again. There were still hard days. Moments when I missed the life I thought I'd have, moments when the hurt would flare up again. But they didn't control me anymore. I wasn't letting them. One evening, while I was out with friends, I found myself laughing. Really laughing. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I hadn't thought about Camille once that day. Not once. It was the first real moment of freedom. And it was mine. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, I was excited to see what it might bring. It's been a few months now, and I can finally say I'm in a better place. The weight of everything that happened hasn't completely disappeared, but I've learned to carry it. I've learned that healing isn't about getting over it quickly, it's about learning to live with the scars and still finding a way to move forward. I've kept my distance from Camille, and it's been the right choice. I'm not angry anymore, not the way I was. But I'm also not the same person I was before everything came crashing down. And I'm okay with that. Life is quieter now. It's less complicated, but it's also more mine. I'm starting to look forward to the things I want, the things I need, without worrying about fitting someone else into my world. I'm rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten about, the things that made me before everything went wrong. I don't know if I'll ever completely forgive Camille. I don't know if that's something I even need to do. What I do know is that I've learned to trust myself again. And that feels like a victory, even if it's a quiet one. I'm not sure what's next, but I'm ready for it. Whatever it is, I'll face it on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough.